The first night I heard the breathing, I thought it was my own, until it answered me. I had just turned off the lights and slid under the sheets when I felt that subtle shift in the room, the way silence can suddenly feel occupied. And then there it was, slow and steady, not from my chest, but from somewhere near the closet door, like someone standing there, trying very hard to be patient. I held my breath to test it, and the sound continued, soft, measured, almost polite, and that was the moment I understood I was not alone in my apartment. I live on the 3rd floor of a building that has always felt slightly unfinished, even though it's been standing for years. The hallway's too long, the lights humming faintly like they're thinking. And from the day I moved in, I noticed a pattern I couldn't quite explain. Things were never exactly where I left them, but never far enough away to accuse anyone of touching them. A mug would be rotated a few degrees, a chair angled just slightly toward the doorway, my bathroom mirror tilted down, as if someone shorter had been studying their reflection. I convinced myself it was settling, air pressure, my imagination adjusting to living alone. The breathing happened 2 weeks after I moved in, and once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. The next night I stayed awake with the lamp on, and it didn't come, and I almost laughed at myself. But on the 3rd night, when I turned the lights off again, it returned immediately, as if darkness was a switch for it. I began testing small rules the way you do with a stray animal you don't want to startle. Rule 1, it only breathed when the room was fully dark. Rule 2, it stopped if I spoke out loud. Rule 3, it never crossed the distance between the closet and the foot of my bed. I don't know why I assumed it had limits, but it felt important to believe that it did. After a week, I realized something else, something that unsettled me more than the breathing itself. The rhythm was changing very gradually, aligning with mine. If I stayed up late, it breathed slowly, lazily, like it was tired too. If I lay there anxious, heart racing, its breathing quickened in sync until I could no longer tell which pattern belonged to which body. I told no one because saying it out loud would make it real, and also because part of me was curious. I have always been curious about things that don't want to be understood. That curiosity is what made me break my own rule and open the closet one afternoon. Nothing was inside except the clothes I hung there, though they seemed closer together than before, like they'd been nudged aside to make room for something thin. I stood there longer than I should have, staring into the dim interior, half expecting to see a silhouette where there shouldn't be one. But all I saw was fabric and shadow. That night, the breathing started earlier than usual, before I even reached the bed, and it wasn't coming from the closet anymore. It was coming from behind me. I froze halfway across the room and felt the air touch the back of my neck, warm and faintly damp. And I said the first thing that came to mind, which was, "Please don't." And the breathing stopped instantly, not fading, but cutting off mid-inhale. I slept with the lights on after that, and for 2 nights, there was nothing. But the apartment began to change in subtler ways. My phone battery drained faster when I left it on the nightstand. The hallway outside my unit echoed differently, like the walls had shifted inward by a fraction. My neighbor downstairs, an older woman who watered her plants at exactly 7 p.m. every evening, missed 2 days in a row. And when I asked her about it, she looked confused and said she hadn't been home. I had heard the water trickling through the pipes both evenings, steady and deliberate. The third night, I decided to try something reckless. I turned off the lights, and instead of getting into bed, I sat on the floor in the center of the room and closed my eyes. The breathing started almost immediately, circling, not fixed in one spot anymore, but moving along the edges of the room, and I realized another rule had changed. It wasn't staying near the closet because I had acknowledged it. It was adjusting. I counted the seconds between each inhale and exhale, trying to map its movement by sound alone, and at one point, it was so close to my left ear that I felt the faint vibration of air. I didn't speak this time. I wanted to see what would happen if I didn't interrupt it. The breathing grew deeper, fuller, almost satisfied, and then I heard something new, layered within it. A subtle echo, as if there were two sets of lungs now, slightly out of sync. I opened my eyes and the room was still empty, but the air felt occupied, thickened. From that night on, I began noticing reflections behaving differently. In the bathroom mirror, my shoulders seemed to angle just a fraction later than they should when I turned. In the dark screen of my television, I caught glimpses of movement that didn't correspond with mine. Something pausing when I paused, but not quite matching my timing. I started avoiding reflective surfaces after sunset, which is harder than it sounds, because almost everything reflects something if the light is low enough. The breathing no longer waited for darkness. It began occurring in the late afternoon, faint but present. And sometimes it happened in rooms I wasn't in. I would be washing dishes and hear it in the bedroom, slow and exploratory, like it was learning the layout. One evening I came home to find all the interior doors closed. I never closed them. I stood in the entryway listening, and there it was again, but softer than ever, almost playful, drifting from behind one of the doors. I didn't open them right away. Instead, I said, "I know you're here." And the breathing paused, then resumed, closer to the floor as if it had crouched. I don't know why that detail frightened me more than anything else. The idea of it lowering itself deliberately. I began sleeping less, not out of fear exactly, but because I felt observed in a way that was almost clinical. It wasn't hostility I sensed. It was attention. The way you might watch an animal in a glass enclosure, waiting to see how it behaves. I tested another rule by leaving a small digital recorder on overnight. In the morning, I played it back and heard hours of nothing. Then at 3:12 a.m., the breathing began, louder than I'd ever perceived it in real time, and beneath it there was a faint second sound, a subtle imitation of my own voice speaking in sleep. The words were indistinct, but the cadence was unmistakably mine. I live alone. I don't talk in my sleep. That recording changed something in me because it meant the phenomenon wasn't confined to my perception. It had weight, vibration, measurable presence. The next day at work, I found myself staring at my reflection in the computer monitor, and for a split second, I saw my mouth curve upward before I felt the muscles move. I don't remember deciding to smile. That was when the thought first occurred to me that perhaps the breathing wasn't separate from me at all. That maybe it had started as something external, but it was gradually aligning itself, merging patterns, the way two metronomes sync when placed on the same surface. I tried spending a night at a friend's place, and for the first few hours, everything felt normal, almost disappointingly so, until I lay down on the couch and turned off the lamp. The breathing started from the hallway outside the living room, faint but undeniable. And my friend texted me from her bedroom, asking if I could hear something strange in the vents. I didn't reply. I lay there listening as it moved closer, not confined by walls anymore, and I realized the last rule had dissolved. It was not tied to the apartment. It was tied to me. I went back home the next morning and the space felt different, less like a site of activity and more like a shell. The breathing still occurred, but now it felt internal, layered beneath my own respiration like a harmony line. Sometimes I would inhale and feel a delay before the exhale came, as if another set of lungs needed to finish first. I began marking small dots on my wrist with a pen every time I heard it distinctly, and within days my skin was covered in ink. The intervals were shrinking. One evening I caught my reflection again, this time in the darkened window, and I noticed something that made my stomach drop. When I held completely still, barely breathing, the reflection's chest continued to rise and fall. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, steady and calm. I moved closer to the glass, and it did not adjust immediately, like it was lagging behind by a fraction of a second. And in that lag, I saw a version of myself that seemed more relaxed than I felt, more patient. I pressed my hand against the window and the reflection mirrored me perfectly then, but I couldn't shake the sense that it had chosen to. I've stopped trying to record it because the act of documenting feels like feeding it. And lately when I wake in the middle of the night, I don't just hear breathing, I hear a faint whisper layered inside it, repeating something too soft to understand. I haven't told anyone because I'm not sure what I would say, that my reflection seems slightly more alive than I am, that sometimes when I close my eyes, I feel a second blink from somewhere deeper inside my head. The most unsettling part is that I'm no longer certain which moments are mine alone. Occasionally, I'll find myself standing in the middle of a room without remembering walking there, listening to a breath that matches mine exactly, and I can't tell if I'm following it or it's following me. Last night I turned off the lights and didn't wait for it to begin. I lay there in the dark and focused on the rhythm in my chest, slow and deliberate. And after a minute I realized there was only one pattern now, seamless and unified. For a brief moment I felt relief, thinking it might be over, that whatever had been hovering at the edge of my perception had finally settled. But then I noticed something else, something small and terrible. Even though I was holding my breath, the rhythm continued, steady and unbroken, and from somewhere very close to my ear, closer than skin, I heard a quiet exhale that did not belong to the body lying in the bed. I didn't move when I heard that exhale, because moving would have meant admitting there was still a difference between us, and in that moment I wasn't sure there was. The air leaving my lungs had stopped, but the sound beside my ear continued, warm and steady, as if something inside my outline had taken over the simple mechanical task of being alive. And I lay there counting seconds that no longer felt connected to my heartbeat, wondering if this was how it finished, not with a scream or a struggle, but with a quiet replacement so gentle no one else would ever notice. And when I finally forced myself to inhale again, the breath felt borrowed, like it had already passed through another set of lungs before reaching mine, slightly warmer than it should have been, slightly delayed. And that was when I felt it shift beneath my skin. Not a touch exactly, but a rearranging, like furniture being moved in a room I couldn't enter. The darkness didn't feel empty anymore. It felt structured, occupied by something that understood the dimensions better than I did. And I realized with a slow creeping dread that the rules I had been testing were never about containment. They were about acclimation. I wasn't studying it. It was studying me, mapping my habits, syncing to my rhythm, learning how to move without causing alarm. And the reason the breathing had matched mine was not imitation but rehearsal. I sat up abruptly and the room tilted in a way that made no physical sense. Like my perspective had shifted half an inch to the left. And for a split second, I saw the room from slightly behind my own eyes, a doubled viewpoint that snapped back into place too quickly to fully process. And I pressed my palms against my temples as if I could hold myself together by force. The air felt thick, almost humid, and when I reached for the lamp, my hand hesitated halfway there because I wasn't entirely sure it was my intention. Guiding it, the movement felt suggested, nudged, like a thought that wasn't mine, had gently proposed turning on the light. I didn't turn it on. I stayed in the dark because something inside me wanted to see how far this could go, and that realization frightened me more than the breathing ever had, the fact that curiosity was still stronger than fear. The whispering started that same night, faint at first, woven into the rhythm of inhalation and exhalation, syllables that dissolved before I could catch them, and I strained to separate the sounds until my ears rang with effort, and then, very softly, I heard my name, spoken in a tone that was almost affectionate. It wasn't outside of me, it resonated from somewhere behind my ribs. I said my own name out loud to counter it, to prove ownership. And the echo came a fraction of a second too late, overlapping my voice in a way that created a strange layered harmony, not mocking, not angry, just present. I didn't sleep after that. I walked the apartment until dawn, listening to the floorboards creak under my weight, and noticing that sometimes the creaks happened just before I stepped, as if anticipating pressure. When morning light filled the room, the sensation dulled but didn't disappear. It receded like something stepping just beyond visibility. And in the bathroom mirror, I saw myself clearly, except for one detail that made my stomach tighten. My pupils were slightly larger than they should have been in full daylight, almost as if I were still standing in darkness. I leaned closer to the mirror, and for a heartbeat, I saw the faintest shadow standing directly behind me, aligned so perfectly with my posture that it was indistinguishable from my own silhouette, except its breathing was visible in the glass, a soft fogging near my shoulder that my body did not produce. I spun around and there was nothing there, but when I turned back to the mirror, the fog remained for one extra second before fading. I started noticing gaps in my memory that were too small to mention but too frequent to ignore. A cup appearing on the counter without recollection of pouring water. My shoes lined neatly by the door when I was certain I'd kicked them off carelessly. Text messages half written in my phone drafts, with sentences I didn't remember typing. Mundane phrases like, "I know you're still here and we're almost ready." And every time I tried to delete them, my finger would hover over the screen longer than necessary, as if waiting for permission. The breathing no longer waited for silence. It continued even in noise, underneath music, beneath the shower's hiss, a constant undertone that I could tune out only by concentrating intensely. And when I stopped concentrating, it flooded back in like a tide. One evening, I deliberately held my breath in front of the mirror for as long as I could, watching closely. And halfway through, the reflection inhaled, deeply, calmly, as if it were sustaining itself independently. And I felt a pull in my chest, a subtle tug toward the glass, like gravity had shifted direction. I stepped back immediately, and the reflection matched me perfectly again. But the sense of autonomy lingered, as if the glass was no longer just showing me, but hosting something parallel. I began hearing faint movements when I was perfectly still. The sound of fabric shifting, though I wasn't wearing loose clothes. The soft pressure of footsteps that matched my stride, but landed a fraction earlier and once while standing in the kitchen, while I felt a gentle pressure on my back between my shoulder blades, not pushing but aligning, straightening my posture in a way that felt corrective, almost instructional. I froze and whispered, "Stop," and the pressure eased but did not fully disappear, lingering like a hand hovering just above contact. Sleep became fragmented, filled with dreams that felt less like stories and more like rehearsals, scenes where I stood in my apartment watching myself move through routines with slightly more precision, slightly less hesitation. And in those dreams, the other version of me breathed steadily while I stood motionless, observing. I would wake with the distinct impression that something had been practicing wearing me. One afternoon at work, I caught my reflection in the darkened window of the building and saw that my expression had softened into a small, contented smile that I did not feel. And when I consciously flattened my mouth, the reflection held the smile for just a fraction longer before adjusting like it had been reluctant to let it go. I started testing small boundaries, doing unexpected movements, turning suddenly, speaking random words aloud, and each time there was the slightest delay in the echo, the faintest stutter in synchronization, as if whatever was aligning with me needed time to recalibrate. That delay began shrinking day by day. The breathing, once separate, was now inseparable, a continuous undercurrent that persisted even when I focused on something else, and sometimes in crowded places. I would sense it expand slightly, as if taking in the presence of others, sampling the air around them too. I began to understand that it was no longer confined to observing me. It was learning through me. The most terrifying moment came quietly, without build-up. I was sitting on the edge of my bed in the dark, not thinking about anything in particular, when I felt my head tilt slightly to the right. A subtle motion I hadn't initiated, and before I could correct, my lips parted and a whisper escaped, soft and clear, "Thank you," in a voice that sounded like mine, but carried a tone I had never used, patient and assured. I clamped my mouth shut and tasted something metallic in the air. Not blood, but the sharp tang of fear rising too quickly, and I realized with cold clarity that the breathing had never been about survival. It had been about synchronization, about establishing a shared rhythm strong enough that separation would become impossible to define. That night when I lay down, I didn't bother testing rules anymore. I closed my eyes and focused on the sensation in my chest, the steady rise and fall that now felt communal. And I waited. The whispering didn't come at first, only the breath, calm and even, and then slowly, almost tenderly, I felt a second blink from inside my skull. Not my eyelids closing, but something deeper, as if another awareness had opened its eyes within me. I kept my own eyes shut, afraid that if I opened them, I might see the room from that other perspective. And as I lay there in the dark, I became painfully aware that even when I stopped breathing entirely, holding myself rigid and silent, the rhythm continued without interruption, steady and unbothered. And somewhere very close, closer than bone or skin, I felt the faintest curve of a smile that I did not choose.